I have a wife whose name is Rosemary, and I have a son whose name is Lance, and he lectures in music at the Free State University. And then, of course, we have 2 grandchildren. Started life in a ghetto called Clarewood, which is the south of Durban, and lived there for many years, grew up as a little boy, schooled in that area. And then later, after my high school years, I decided that I wanted to be a priest. Well, I didn't make the decision. Somebody suggested it to me. And then I decided, yes, that is the right thing to do. And off I went to the Eastern Cape, to the Federal Theological Seminary. That was in '69. The seminaries at next to Fort Hare University, so there was a lot of connections between our 2 institutions. And then when I was ordained in 1971 as a deacon of the church, I decided that I would continue to be involved in what was then called the Black Consciousness Movement, the South African Students' Organization, with people like Steve Biko and Bani Pichana and Harry Nangukulu and so on. That was a great turning point in my life because it provided me with an opportunity to become involved in issues of transformation in our country. Of course, I was rewarded for that because in 1973, I was banned by the South African government. Although I was still a priest, I was not allowed to visit an educational institution. I wasn't allowed to speak publicly, that is, or publish or anything like that. So it was quite a restrictive order. And then in 1976, that was lifted. But I have to say that it didn't change my mind about the need to be involved in injustice issues. And I continue to do that because I think that's what the church is about. It's not just about looking inwardly, but it's also about looking outwardly and trying to be an agent for change in the world. And of course, in our country today, there's still very many challenges, such as poverty, the abuse of children and women, you know, the economy is taking a beating, and the list goes on. So we have to ask the question, how can we collaborate with, say, other NGOs and be a force for change in the country? So an interesting childhood, brought up in an extremely poor family, but was given opportunities by people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who made it possible for me to study overseas. And when I returned to this country, I felt, you know, I should really invest that which I've received to improve the lives of others, including young people. I was at home when I received the news. My secretary phoned me and said, she was all excited, and she said, you know, you've just been nominated as a living legend in the city. And I said, well, you must be joking. It was hard to believe. I didn't expect it. I wasn't even sure that I deserved it because I know the city well, and I know there are so many outstanding and dedicated people who've contributed to the betterment of the country. So I was very excited and felt actually really genuinely humbled by the fact that I was nominated. Well, I was alone in my study, and then my wife was in the kitchen, so after I'd heard the news, I went to tell her about it, and of course she was equally excited at the news, and you know, she congratulated me, and that was lovely. Yeah, a wonderful celebration. a couple of people. I think as I was growing up, my father, my parents did actually, they taught me the values of care and compassion and to be kind and to always look to other people and to be of service to them. And then the other person who had a profound influence on my life was Steve Biko himself. When I joined the Black Consciousness movement, Steve and I became very good friends. In fact, he and I and a couple of others put together the what we call the Black Conscious Manifesto. And Steve and I would spend many, many hours together talking about the country, talking about the role of young people, particularly in bringing about fundamental change. So in fact, when our youngest son was born, we named him Stephen, after Steve Biko. Unfortunately, we lost that son, but he felt very proud that he was named after such a great legend like Steve Biko. Yes, I think there's no question about it. I think I'm able to do what I do, not only in the church, but in society in general, like working among shack dwellers, people with HIV/AIDS, and the list is quite long, because of my experiences of the past. It's been a wonderful training for me and has really equipped me to do God's work in the world. Well, apart from, parents and family, there was the time when I went to study to be a priest to the Federal Theological Seminary in the Eastern Cape. And that was a real turning point in my life, because for the first time I lived with people who were so different from me, and I mean, racially. We were such a mixed bag of people. Up until then, although I grew up in a fairly liberal home, and we interacted with people of other races and cultures and so on, that was the first time when I was able to sit down and hear the stories of real suffering and oppression in this country. So that was, as I look back, quite a defining moment in my life. And I think it's a great pity when young people today and others don't have that experience, when they live in their racial ghettos or class ghettos or whatever it is. And that's the genius of this country. It's not that we always get the economy right and so on. Yes, of course, we have to do those things. But we're a melting pot of different races and cultures and so on. And it's the great thing that we can offer the country, is how do we find each other? How do we live with one another? How do we walk side by side? And I think the rest of the world hasn't got it right. And my prayer and hope is that South Africa will certainly get that right. And of course, the other time was when I was banned. Now, I remember the time the security police with a machine gun, actually, one of them held. Why you want to hold a machine gun to a young priest, I don't know. Anyway, and they presented me with that banning order. Initially, I felt that my world had crumbled, because I knew the implications of that. But as I lived with that order, I began to realize that it was really shaping me to be the kind of person I think God wanted me to be. To develop and to adopt values that weren't materialistic, but were about people. So I can think of at least those two things that really shaped my life. Yeah. I should say, the greatest challenges facing us today is poverty. I don't think that people in this country, like your Desmond Tutus and your Steve Bikos, your Spu Zigodes, and so on, have sacrificed so much in order that they might continue to live in poverty and live in informal shacks and so on. The sacrifices that people made, and often, in many instances, people lost loved ones in the struggle against apartheid, have done that in order that we can be a better society where the previously disadvantaged can enjoy the fruits of this very wealthy country. So poverty has all sorts of implications and ramifications. It's not simply about living in a shack, but it continues to take away one's dignity. The very thing that apartheid eroded in us, it took away our dignity, and now we don't want to lose that anymore. Too many sacrifices have been made, and so it's really up to the elected political officials of this country to ensure that they deliver to the people what is rightfully theirs. And we need to move away radically and urgently from corruption and self-gain, which is killing us as a country. So it's this poverty with all its ramifications that I think poses the biggest challenge to us. I have, and I feel very humbled by it. There's this living legends recognition, which is a wonderful thing. And then a couple of years ago, I received an international peace award called the Bremen Peace Award for my contribution to peacemaking in this country, for my involvement with the poor, and more recently I received what was called the Diaconia Peace Award, which was actually the only church-based award that I received. And that's for my involvement primarily with shack dwellers. They're very close to me. Maybe it has to do with the fact that I grew up in a shack, so I can identify with people in that way. And then a few years ago, when I was chair of what was called the Natal Technicon, now the Steve Biko campus, and I'm very proud that it's named after Steve Biko, I was given an honorary doctorate by what is now the Durban University of Technology, I think it's called. Yeah, so those were some of the awards I've received. I don't know. I'm not looking at the end. I still want to be involved in the things that I'm involved in, and even more. I feel increasingly called to work with and among young people, because I think they get, generally speaking, a bad deal in our country. So to answer your question more directly, these various awards and recognitions, well, it affirms me as a person and my family. It also says to me that some of what I've done is right. You always hope that what you do in life is meaningful and correct and all of that. And I think these awards do that. Of course, I feel a little uncomfortable because the people who, and I know it sounds very cliched, but the people who really deserve the awards are those, I've been able to work with over the years. Yeah, well, I sit on the Provincial AIDS Committee, and I feel I'm making a contribution to the struggle against HIV/AIDS, and that's an important involvement. As I've said repeatedly, I'm very involved with shack dwellers, and have even visited them in prison, and was part of the Constitutional Court case a couple of years ago where the shack dwellers won that case. Not everybody's happy that that happened, but it was a great victory, so it's good to be a part of that. I continue to be involved in what I call a prophetic ministry, and that is speaking truth to power. Yes, as the church, we need to work in partnership with government, with the NGO sector, and all these formations. But it is also important for the church to remind those in power and to remind the leaders that they are essentially servants. They're called to serve the people. And where that is not happening, then it's incumbent upon us, and people like me as a bishop of the church, to voice our opinion, to say, Baso, you're going the wrong way. Please return to what is your essential calling, and that is to serve the people of this great land.